Movie record of a trip around the world that I took with my friend Don Farquhar in 1953 and 54. During our travel, we drove 23,000 miles, starting in England and ending in India, crossing parts of the Middle East where roads were often buried by blowing sand or there were only trails through the mountains. Our trip begins at my home on Keeler Avenue in Chicago. Here we are loading Dad's car for the drive to New York. This video is 66 minutes. We visited 26 countries, an average of 2.5 minutes per country, only enough to look at what was most significant to us. The audio was added in 1998, but it matches the time of the filming, 1953 to 54. This is the ship that took us to England, the Liberté. It is one of the luxury liners that crosses the Atlantic. Mom and Dad had flown to New York to see us off and to drive their car back to Chicago. They came aboard for the Bon Voyage festivities, and they relaxed on these deck chairs before leaving the ship. This is a telephoto of Mom and Dad waving goodbye to us as we were about to depart. The motion pictures of this trip were taken with a 16mm Bolex camera with a 3-turret lens. Our stay in New York was only a day, but it was fun. The view of the New York skyline as we left the dock was a bonus. So was seeing the Statue of Liberty from the ship. Most tourists, and even New Yorkers, don't have the opportunity to see these sights from a luxury liner putting out to sea. The Liberté is a French ship and one of the premier ships that crossed the Atlantic. We had a 4-bed cabin on sea deck, which was above the waterline but without portholes. The first class section was separate from the tourist class. We were assigned to a table for 6. Here are Don and Bill. Bill went with us as far as Vienna. I never had time for breakfast because of all of the late night festivities. We met many new friends, and I asked them to be on deck for the photography the last day of our voyage. These are our friends. We played ping pong. I introduced them to round-robin ping pong so more could play. We played cards. We danced at afternoon and evening dances. We had long discussions about each other's background and future plans. The camaraderie was fantastic. When we arrived in England, we completed the purchase of a new 1953 French Citroën automobile and toured London. This is the Tower of London, built in the 13th century. It has been a jail for royalty, and it houses the crown jewels. The Tower Bridge was built in 1830. The passageway from tower to tower had been closed for about 30 years prior to our visit. St. Paul's Cathedral is the 3rd largest church in the world. I had to climb up 6 stories of the remains of a bombed church tower and crawl out on a 2-foot ledge to get this view of the cathedral and the surrounding bomb damage during World War II. The clock tower is known as Big Ben, and the attached building is for the Houses of Parliament, the House of Lords, and the House of Commons. It is a miracle that these historic buildings survived the German blitzkrieg and firebombing. Westminster Abbey is the best-known church in England. Here the royalty are often coronated, and many are entombed in the abbey. The royalty of Great Britain are a very important part of British life and history. The palaces and traditions are a source of pride and entertainment for the British. This ceremony is the changing of the guard. Here, the new guard is arriving and the old guard is leaving. Next in the sequence is the arrival of the horse guard. The coronation of Queen Elizabeth II took place in Westminster Abbey on June 2, 1953, just a few months ago, so the pageantry and ceremonies were still very prevalent. The changing of the guard as seen here is taking place at Buckingham Palace, which is the official residence of the royal family. It is not open to the public. Another aspect of the changing of the guard is the slow step, seen here. It has been 8 years since Germany surrendered. It has been 10 years since the terrible fire bombings and U-2 bombings of London. We saw signs of the bomb damage, but were amazed that London had been rebuilt so extensively and so quickly. This is our brand new French Citroën that we drove to India. We would drive 23,000 miles on this trip, starting with a tour of the English countryside. Buckingham Palace, and me. My friend Joy Gillette took us on a tour of southern England. She insisted that the three of us spend the night at her home. We used our air mattresses on their living room floor, but not at this house. This is Bouveridge, the manor home of the Gordon family. Joy lived here during the time that she cared for the children of the family. One of the children is Alexander, who is here with Joy and me. This is a beautiful estate home with wonderful gardens. They raise racehorses. Next, Joy took us to the Salisbury Cathedral. This Gothic cathedral has one of the tallest spires in England, 404 feet tall. It is a splendid example of Gothic architecture. The prehistoric circle of stones at Stonehenge are among the oldest signs of man in England. They were erected 3,000 to 4,000 years ago, and it is a mystery how they got here and what they mean. This is Longleat Mansion. This massive building was built in the 16th century. And this is the remains of Tintagel Castle, supposedly the birthplace of the legendary King Arthur. A cave far below the castle is called Merlin's Cave, also based on the King Arthur legend. William Shakespeare was born in this house in the year 1564. It is in the village of Stratford-upon-Avon. We went to a performance of Antony and Cleopatra at the Shakespeare Memorial Theater. And this is the Anne Hathaway cottage, also dating from the 16th century. She became Shakespeare's wife. Our next stop was Oxford University. This is Christ Church, the cathedral for the university. Some of the colleges at Oxford are over 500 years old. Oxford is not only famous for its education, but also for the architectural beauty and ivory-covered walls of its buildings. Windsor Castle has been the home of English kings for 900 years, and many are buried here. Part of this massive castle dates back to William the Conqueror. This is the Piccadilly Circus, which is the Times Square of London. Many of the streets in London are centuries old and often curved. Frequently, even modern buildings have a curved frontage to match the curve of the street. We had to cross the English Channel to get from England to mainland Europe. We had to get the car through customs and get all the necessary documents signed before our car could be loaded. The White Cliffs of Dover are world-renowned for their beauty. They are enjoyed by travelers leaving from Dover for the Channel crossing or arriving from Dover. Our ship took us from Dover to Ostend, Belgium. We visited the Palace of Justice in Brussels. It is claimed to be the largest architectural building built in the 19th century. In May of 1940, the Dutch city of Rotterdam was completely destroyed by German bombing. This is a monument of a ruined city, a reminder of that destruction. Amsterdam is the capital of Holland. This is the royal palace where Queen Juliana resides. It was built in 1648 as a town hall. The Netherlands are so low, below sea level, that large buildings are built on pilings. This palace was built on 14,000 pilings. Amsterdam is a city of canals, over 50 of them. Canal boats are a common means of transportation and a wonderful way to tour the city. Don and Bill are getting aboard one of these sightseeing boats. Amsterdam has an immense natural harbor. There are floating docks in the harbor where huge ships can be repaired. One of the many buildings of interest was the Russian church, St. Nicholas, which is at the end of this canal. Our tour by canal took us under many bridges. There are 410 bridges in Amsterdam and many elegant buildings and architectural styles. We left Amsterdam and drove through Holland with its lowlands, dikes, and canals. The functional value of windmills is a thing of the past. The few that are still around are usually only ornamental. We drove across northern Germany and into Denmark. Copenhagen is the major city in Denmark. This is a town hall and square in Copenhagen. In order to get a good picture of these, we went up to the top floor of the SAS building, and they gave us permission to go out on the balcony for the photography. This is the Christiansborg Palace, where the Parliament convenes, and the three of us. We drove from Denmark to the spectacular beauty of Sweden. Lake Vättern is the largest lake in Sweden. We drove along the east side of Lake Vättern for over 100 kilometers, enjoying many scenic overlooks. The Swedish countryside was colorful, especially as the trees were turning to their autumn colors. This is a typical home of northern Sweden. As we got farther north, there were fewer farms and more forests. This is a panoramic view of the area around Soderham that I am enjoying. Pulp and paper are the major industries of Soderham. The forests of northern Sweden, like these, provide the lumber for the biggest pulp manufacturing area in Sweden. We drove inland from here, west towards Norway. This is the Rista Falls, one of the more beautiful in the area. As we got farther north, it got colder and more barren. This was as far north as we would go, 64 degrees north. The road from here to Norway was desolate, with no facilities. After we passed the ski resort at Aar, there would be nothing until Trondheim, not even a custom station at the border. Don and Bill would not look so happy and relaxed if they knew what lay ahead of us. This is the ski area at Aar, the most popular in Sweden, and our last look at civilization in Sweden. That night we got caught in a blizzard on our way to Norway. We arrived at this home late at night in a blizzard. Amazingly, the lady who didn't speak English took us in. The next morning it was clear, so we drove back over the part of the road we had crossed the night before. I saw these reindeer and had to stalk them to get close enough for this telephoto shot. When we were driving on this road last night, we were almost out of gas. It was cold, and the visibility was poor because of the blizzard. The first sign of life was the home of Mrs. Grunwald. She welcomed us, got food from her cellar, fed us dinner, and treated us like royalty. No wonder Don and I felt like kids and threw snowballs at Bill when he was filming us. We left the Arctic Circle and drove south to Oslo. This is the famous Vigeland sculpture with the 50-foot monolith and the accompanying fountain. The Oslo City Hall is much more modern than the typical European town halls. We left Norway and drove through Denmark on our way to Germany. We thought this was an interesting method of cultivation in post-World War II Denmark. Kiel, Germany is a port city on the Baltic Sea. It is also an industrial city, so it was leveled by Allied bombers. You can see some of the bomb damage that remains even to this day. Lübeck, however, was an ancient and cultural city, so it wasn't bombed. These beautiful buildings in historical Lübeck were left unscathed. We flew to Berlin because it was in the Russian sector of Germany, and you couldn't drive through their sector. You can still see the bomb damage 8 years after Germany surrendered. Berlin is also divided into four sectors of the four Allies: Russia, the U.S., Britain, and France. The stewardess on our flight offered to show us Berlin that evening. She took us to the Club Reise, a splendid nightclub where every table had a phone and a table number. You could call any table you wanted to talk to, not knowing what language they would speak. Most spoke English, so you could have interesting conversations and dancing and a lot of fun. This is our stewardess, Erica, with us after deplaning in Berlin. Here we see the Russian monument and the Reichstag, which is the German parliament that Hitler burned, and the famous Brandenburg Gate. This is a statue of Stalin in the Russian sector. And this is the cemetery for Russian soldiers killed in the Battle of Berlin, also in East Berlin. You are not allowed to photograph Russian soldiers like these at this Russian monument, so I took a telephoto movie of Bill and Don, and the soldiers happened to be in the background. This is a Kurfürstendamm, a bustling section of West Berlin. West Berlin was booming. Communist East Berlin was dead. This famous statue, the Victory Statue, predates World War II. This Russian department store was torched 3 months ago by unhappy citizens of East Berlin. And this is a statue of Turnvater Jan, my great-great-grandfather and founder of the Turnverein. This statue, the Watch on the Rhine, we saw as we took a cruise down the Rhine River, which is famous for this statue and for many castles that have been built along the Rhine for centuries, like this one and this one. This area is also known for the vineyards that provide the Rhine wine for the Lorelei and for the Lorelei. What is the Lorelei? This rocky formation to the right of Don, this protrusion, is the Lorelei. The legend is that sirens would sing haunting songs that would lure sailors to crash into the rocks. More castles. The Heidelberg Castle is a splendid example of German architecture of the 17th century. It was badly damaged by the French during Napoleon's conquest of Germany. We rode a cable car up the mountain for a better view of the castle. Austria is also divided into 4 zones. We left the American zone and entered the Russian zone. We were permitted to drive to Vienna, but were not allowed to stop anywhere en route. St. Stephen's Cathedral was built in the 14th century, and this is the most important in Austria. Vienna, like Berlin, is divided into 4 zones. The Hofburg is the main government building and flies the 4 flags of the 4 allies. Schönbrunn is the palace of the Habsburgs. They ruled Austria for 200 years, from Maria Theresa to Franz Joseph. We took a chance and ate lunch at this store in the East Zone. Unfortunately, I left my journal at the store, and we had to drive back 60 kilometers to retrieve it. These farmers are in the East Zone of Austria and are harvesting turnips. They worked much faster when I started filming them. They probably thought we were communist inspectors. It became more mountainous as we returned to the West Zone. This is Innsbruck, a picturesque town in the Alpine Valley in the West Zone. As we drove through the valley of the Inn River, we were impressed with the beauty of the Alps and the Alpine villages. The homes seemed to add to the beauty of the mountains rather than detract from it. Behind these clouds is the Zugspitze, the tallest mountain in Germany. The Swiss towns and valleys are equally as picturesque as are the Austrian, and more mountainous. This is an alpine valley in Switzerland. This is the colorful town of Lucerne with its famous wooden footbridge. Under the canopy of the bridge, there was a series of murals overhead. This alpine valley has Lake Lucerne to add to its beauty. We drove along mountain roads with spectacular views through the Swiss Alps and the Brunig Pass. This is a telephoto view of the Jungfrau, a 13,500-foot high mountain, and its neighboring mountains. Among the Alps we are seeing, the highest are the Wetterhorn, the Eiger, the Schreckhorn, and the Monk. More Alps. On the way to Geneva, Switzerland, we drove past this lake, Bringersee. Geneva is the home of the United Nations. We drove on to Paris. The Arch of Triumph was built by Napoleon beginning in 1806 as a monument to his victories. This is the Eiffel Tower and Don and Me. It was built for the Paris exhibition of 1889. It is almost 1,000 feet tall and has 12,000 pieces of steel. It is located in the Parc Champs-de-Mars, where we were seen walking. The Cathedral of Notre Dame was built during the 11th to 14th centuries on the Seine River and is known for its flying buttresses. The Sacré-Cœur Basilica on Montmartre overlooks Paris. It was built to fulfill a vow of the entire nation after the Franco-Russian War of 1870. This is the view of the Arch of Triumph from the Eiffel Tower. Now we're descending from the Eiffel Tower. I left my camera in the elevator, and this upside-down shot was taken by the guard who recovered my camera and returned it to me. The broad Champs-Élysées is a popular setting for sidewalk cafes. We left Paris, drove across France, and entered Spain at the coastal town of San Sebastian. We drove from San Sebastian inland to Madrid. This is the King's Palace in Madrid. It was built from 1740 to 1760 for Spanish kings and has 2,000 rooms. Here we are in the center of Madrid. Surprisingly, the post office seen here is one of the most attractive buildings in Madrid. Plaza de Toro, the largest bullfighting ring in the world, seats 200,000. This scene of grazing sheep is on the way from Madrid to Valencia. I was surprised to learn that Spain is the second largest country in Europe. This is Nice, the heart of the French Riviera, a popular resort city on the Mediterranean coast. And this is the Italian Riviera, also on the Mediterranean coast. Rapallo is the largest and the most popular of the towns on the Italian Riviera. You will recognize this as the Leaning Tower of Pisa. It was begun in 1174 and took 175 years to build. The adjacent baptistry was begun in 1153, 900 years ago, and the cathedral was begun in the year 1119. We are overlooking Florence. Florence is known as the cradle of the Renaissance. You can see the cathedral and the Church of Santa Croce. There is an abundance of Renaissance art in Florence, probably more there than anywhere else. This is the Church of Santa Croce. Dante, Galileo, Michelangelo are all buried here. We drove on to Rome. The Colosseum in Rome was begun by Emperor Vespasian and completed by Emperor Titus in 80 AD, over 1,900 years ago. It is about the size of a football stadium that seats 50,000. You can see our Citroen in the foreground. St. Peter's Cathedral is the largest church in the world, located in the Vatican and center of the Roman Catholic faith. This is all that remains of the magnificent Roman Forum. Roman emperors, Julius Caesar, Nero, Hadrian, and others, ruled the Roman Empire from here, from the 6th century BC to the 5th century AD. These are the remains of the Temple of Vestal Virgins, and I am visualizing how magnificent they were during the early BC years when they were built. The Pantheon is the best preserved monument of Imperial Rome, begun in 27 BC. The Victor Emmanuel Monument, built at the turn of the century, is the most imposing landmark of Rome. This is a telephoto look at the Colosseum from the Victor Emmanuel Monument. We drove south to Naples and went by boat to the Isle of Capri. The mountain is Mount Vesuvius, which buried Pompeii with lava when it erupted in 79 AD. While in Naples, our car was broken into and many of our things were stolen. This is the port at the Isle of Capri. The Isle of Capri is only 4.5 square miles, but its highest point is 2,000 feet above sea level. This view is from the 1,000-foot high Anna Capri. Capri is also famous for the Blue Grotto. We visited Pompeii, the Roman city that was totally destroyed 1,900 years ago by lava flow from an erupting Mount Vesuvius. As the lava is removed by archaeologists, an exact Roman town is revealed. This is the splendid Basilica of St. Mark in Venice. It was built in the 10th century for the body of St. Mark. The 2 o'clock feeding of pigeons is a daily ritual. The original Venice is a city without roads. Water taxis, gondolas, and other watercraft provide the only transportation, using a network of 160 canals. I tried to row a gondola, but soon learned that using a 15-foot oar, both as an oar and rudder, is tricky, harder than it looks. The poor light doesn't allow a good view of this beautiful Palace of Doges. This is Belgrade, Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia is the only communist country open to tourists. The Yugoslav Parliament building is similar in shape to the U.S. Capitol, but much smaller. The Greek Orthodox Church in Belgrade. The Yugoslav tomb of the unknown soldier. It's on a promontory above a long and wide surrounding plain. We spent Thanksgiving Day driving through central Yugoslavia on our way to Zagreb. There were almost no cars on the road. We followed the river Riska. We enjoyed these Thanksgiving treats along the way. Hi, Don. Perhaps this was a holiday in this village, too, because we saw them doing this folk dance. Further along, we enjoyed watching the children sliding on ice, just as we once did. We drove east through Yugoslavia and the northern arm of Greece, the only non-communist land link between Europe and the Middle East. We left our car in Salonik and flew south past Mount Olympus on our way to Athens. The Parthenon is the most splendid of the architectural masterpieces that comprise the Acropolis. It was built 2,400 years ago. We were so excited by these architectural wonders that we stayed past sunset. These are the remains of the temple of Olympian Zeus, begun by the Greeks in the 6th century BC and finally finished by Roman Emperor Hadrian in the 2nd century AD. We returned to the Acropolis to see more. This is the Erechtheum, built in 420 BC. and this is the Theseum. It is the best preserved of the Greek temples. It was built in the 5th century BC. We continued to drive across northern Greece, where communist rebels were active only 4 years ago. This road goes through the narrow land link between non-communist Europe and Asia Minor. Edirne was the first city we went to in Turkey. This is a famous mosque there. But here in Istanbul is the most famous and largest of all mosques. It is known as Saint Sophia. It began as a Christian church in 325 AD. On the way from Istanbul to Ankara, we had car problems. We were towed 2 miles by a team of oxen and then 95 miles by truck. We didn't see another car the entire trip. It took all night. This is the mausoleum of Ataturk. He brought the democracy to Turkey in the 20th century. We drove through Turkey, across plateaus, through mountains, and along lakes, but didn't see any cars. We were surprised to see camels in such a cold climate, but saw many. This is Iskenderun, Turkey, a resort town on the Mediterranean Sea. To get here, we drove through the Tarsus Mountains over 1,000 feet high, through a pass called the Selican Gate, which has been used to get from Europe to Asia since 1000 BC. We drove from Turkey to Syria. This area has been a source of wheat for millenniums. Even today, in 1953, sometimes the wheat is separated from the chaff by this ancient method. We drove through Syria to Beirut. Beirut, Lebanon was the most modern and progressive of the Arab cities. This is Damascus, the capital city of Syria. It claims to be the oldest city in the world that is still inhabited. And this is Jerusalem, a city divided between Arabs and Jews, between the old city and the new city. This is the Dome of the Rock temple area. It was built in the 6th century. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre was also built in the 6th century, supposedly on the site where Christ is entombed. We flew from Jerusalem to Cairo, Egypt. There are 3 pyramids near Cairo. Riding camels is an appropriate way to see the pyramids. The Great Pyramid was built by Cheops about 5,000 years ago as his tomb. The burial chamber is in the exact center of the pyramid. We were able to see it by crawling a long way on our hands and knees through a 3-foot tunnel. Each pyramid has its temples. The Sphinx is a temple of the Great Pyramid. This is a view of Cairo from the Citadel, a fortress complex built by Saladin in 1200 AD. The earliest Egyptian dynasties built the city of Memphis about 5,000 years ago. This is what remains of Memphis today. This is the oldest pyramid, the Step Pyramid in Memphis. In ancient Egypt, each city had a nearby city of the dead. The city of the dead was more elaborate than their city of the living because the ancient Egyptians built their permanent homes more enduring than their temporary homes. This is the Valley of the Kings in Upper Egypt, where the latter dynasties buried their pharaohs in magnificent underground chambers. This is the famous terrace temple of Queen Hatshepsut, which she had built as a monument to herself during her reign. We crossed the Nile from the city of the dead to ancient Thebes, the city of the living. This is the splendid temple of Karnak, built by Ramesses II in 1300 BC. And this is the equally famous temple of Luxor, built by Amenhotep III about 4,000 years ago. We flew back to Jerusalem from Cairo. This is the Church of the Nativity in Bethlehem. It was built in 330 AD on the place where Christ was born. This is Bethlehem on December 21st, 1953. it probably looked very much the same 1953 years ago when Christ was born here. We drove back to Jerusalem and began the unknown part of our adventure, the drive to India. We drove across the Syrian desert from Amman, Jordan to Baghdad, Iraq. We had 2 flat tires en route, so we were thankful that we carried 2 spares. We saw camel caravans, but no cars. These are the ruins of Babylon, originally built in 4000 BC and rebuilt in the 6th century BC. This is the city of Baghdad and the Tigris River. We drove from Baghdad to Tehran, Iran. My camera was sealed at the Iranian border. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs finally gave me a permit, so our photography continued. And this is the main street in Tehran. We got a special permit to visit the Gulistan Palace, home of the Peacock Throne. Don and I were the only visitors. My Iranian friend from Fort Belvoir, Colonel Samian, had the authority to take us to see the alabaster home of Reza Shah the Great, which is closed to visitors, and also to see the alabaster tomb of Reza Shah the Great. Here we are driving across Persia. From here until Pakistan, there would be no paved roads, frequently only camel trails. Isfahan is the treasury of Persian architecture. This mosque also houses the theological school. The King's Mosque was built in 1630, before colonial America. The 167-foot high dome is covered with turquoise tiles. The Isfahan bazaars have everything from exquisite copperware and Persian carpets to everyday wear. Occasionally we saw people along our route. Usually they were working hard to keep the road passable. We drove across the desert of southern Iran. The sand dunes are called walking hills because they move with the wind and frequently block the road. Along the camel route are small villages called caravanserais. Here's a caravanserai seen behind Don. The next thing you will see are the qanats, the most amazing feature of the desert. It is a system of collecting water by building an underground creek for 10 miles or more to collect water and deliver water to a well at a village. These men are bringing up mud that is loaded into leather buckets by other men 200 feet below to keep the water flowing through this underground creek. Here we are in the Iranian town of Kerman. We spent the night in the Point 4 office in Kerman, with our sleeping bags, of course. And then we drove across the Kerman desert and past the 14,500-foot Kiki Hazar Mountains. This is the caravanserai of Bam. They let us spend the night in the mayor's office. We drove further from civilization, and the road got worse. Here we are stuck in the sand, in a small sand dune that had drifted across the road. We had to let the air out of our tires and drive around the dune. We gave a lift to one of the workers that helped us. He took this picture of Don and me in our Citroen. The only way through the mountains of southeast Persia was to follow the riverbed. In the worst sections, one of us drove while the other walked ahead and moved aside the larger boulders. Just beyond the pass was a tiny village of mud huts. These musicians entertained us. We also had lunch of mutton and vegetables with the villagers here. There was another long stretch between Zahedan, Iran, and Sucker, Pakistan, where we wouldn't be able to get gasoline or petrol. We carried 60 gallons with us, 50 gallons in the tank, and 45 gallons, 9 5-gallon cans, one of which I am using here. We left Iran and entered Pakistan. The roads improved, but we didn't see any cars or trucks, just desert, sand dunes, and camels. This is Sucker, Pakistan. When we arrived here, everything went wrong because we hadn't entered Pakistan legally, since there was no customs station on the trail from the mountains of Iran. Therefore, we couldn't change money, couldn't buy food, couldn't get a hotel room. Then we met these friends, and everything went right. They took us on a tanga to see the barrage. It was a just completed dam of the Indus River that provided massive irrigation to the area. On our way to Lahore, we stopped to watch cotton being processed. The owner became our guide and invited us to dinner. In another small village, we saw how sugar cane is crushed to get the sugar juice, which is boiled to get raw sugar. These are the Shalimar Gardens in Lahore. They were designed by the Mughal Emperor Shah Jahan, who also built the Taj Mahal. This is the tomb of Jahangir, another of the great Mughal rulers and the father of Shah Jahan. This mosque in Lahore was built by Aurangzeb, the son of Shah Jahan. We left Pakistan, a Muslim country created 7 years ago when it was split from India, a Hindu country, which also got its independence from Britain 7 years ago in 1947. The Golden Temple of Sikhs is in Amritsar and is the main shrine of the Sikh religion. We arrived at the India Gate in Delhi, the capital of India. We had achieved our goal of driving from Europe to India. These are the capitol buildings of Delhi: the Secretariat, the President's Palace, and the Parliament. The Qutb Minar is a 234-foot high tower built in the 13th century. We climbed the 378 steps to the top. Unfortunately, it was Sunday, and that Sunday it was jammed with Indians on a Sunday outing. Hindu temples are much more flamboyant than Muslim mosques or Christian churches. This is the Birla Hindu temple. The world-famous Taj Mahal was built by Shah Jahan in 1650 as the tomb of his wife of 18 years. It has a reputation as the most beautiful sight in the world. One of the wonders of the world is seeing the Taj Mahal by the light of the full moon. I had that experience exactly on my 26th birthday. Seeing the Taj Mahal by the light of the full moon. India is also known for its snake charmers. These are king cobras. The mongoose is one of the animals that is quick enough to avoid the cobra strike. They will actually attack cobras for food. This python is a much safer snake to handle. This complex, the Red Fort, was built by the Mughals as a massive enclosure of many buildings. This palace was abandoned. We found an open door and explored it when 2 policemen arrived to arrest us. We casually got in our car and drove off, leaving them waving at us. This is one way of drawing water in rural India. The marble rocks of Jabalpur are one of India's most scenic attractions. The white cliffs are magnesium limestone. The stone for the Taj Mahal came from here. After viewing the gorge by rowboat, we hiked to the upper edge of the gorge to see the Dwandar Falls, Snake Falls in English. Sacred cows and water buffalo were common along the road from Nagpur to Akola and on to Aurangabad. We spent half a day exploring these Buddhist caves built from the 2nd century BC to the 7th century AD. They included extensive chambers with sculptures of Buddha and his followers. This is the so-called Small Taj, the tomb of the wife of Shah Jahan's son, Aurangzeb. The Ellora Caves, also Buddhist caves, include a 164-foot long by 190 feet wide by 96 feet high, cut deep into a single rock formation. Along the way we saw Indians working their fields, plowing and sowing seed, often a family activity. They also harvested fish by manually dragging large nets. Elephanta Island, near Bombay, is the site of more Buddhist caves. It was here that we saw these monkeys, stalked them, and took this telephoto pictures of them. This is also Elephanta Island, near Bombay, India. These are the famous Malabar Gardens. They are also known as the Hanging Gardens, since they are built over the water reservoir that serves Bombay. Don and I enjoyed Bombay. It was the first city since our trip began where we stayed more than a few days. We had to arrange transportation home for us and our car. As we left Bombay on February 13, 1954, we could see the Taj Mahal Hotel, which is one of the most elegant in India, on the waterfront. And this is a telephoto of the gateway to India. In our case, it was the gateway from India, as we were leaving aboard the Hook Silvercrest, a passenger-carrying freighter. Our first stop was Cochin, on the west coast of India. We weren't able to go into Cochin because of a smallpox epidemic there. This is the laundry room of a nearby hotel. Our next port of call was Colombo, on the island of Ceylon. This is a fishing village near Colombo. These village huts are typical of those all along the coast of Ceylon. And this is a street scene in the market area of Colombo. Our impressions were that it was congested but colorful. Buddhism is the principal religion of Ceylon, so we saw many Buddhist monks, all dressed alike. And coconuts are a staple of the island. We saw coconuts being harvested frequently as we were touring the island. This is the mountain town of Kandy. It was the last capital of Ceylon, of the natives, the Ceylonese. A tooth enshrined inside this temple of the tooth is claimed to be Buddha's. Elephants are quite common in Ceylon. It was fun to ride an elephant here, just as it was fun to ride on a camel in Egypt. Our next stop was Penang, a beautiful tropical island off the coast of Malaysia. In rural areas, the huts are often built on stilts. That way they are cooler and it keeps out most of the insects and animals. And the ladies carry their wear on their heads. Penang Town is the main town on the island of Penang. Check these vehicles. Singapore was next. My roommate Ken and another passenger, Rolf, are here at St. Andrew's Cathedral, the largest church in Malaysia. These are the famous Tiger Balm Gardens, an amusement park built by the Tiger Balm King, who made a fortune selling Tiger Balm. Singapore is a major port, and there are many boats and wharves along the Singapore River. Most of the people of Singapore are Chinese, but there is still a Chinatown district, and this is it. Next on our agenda was the Philippine town of Isabela on the island of Basilan. We loaded mahogany here. The Moros, with their unique attire, are the natives of Basilan Island. We left Isabela and sailed for Manila, the capital of the Philippine Islands. As we approached Manila, we saw Corregidor Island and the Bataan Peninsula, where the Japanese overran the U.S. Army 12 years ago. The infamous Death March of captured American soldiers and Philippine soldiers to prison camps took place on the Bataan Peninsula. The Philippine Congress meets in this building in Manila. And this is the town hall for the city of Manila. When the U.S. recaptured Manila in 1944, the Japanese made their final stand here in the walled city of Intramuros. Only one of 17 churches survived the battle. This is the palace home of Magsaysay, the President of the Philippines. St. Thomas University is older than Harvard. Civilian prisoners of the Japanese were interned here during World War II. We left Manila and headed for Los Angeles. Our ship, the Hook Silvercrest, had a 4-blade propeller. These are the passengers. At 4 a.m., March 28th, 1954, in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, the ship hit something that broke off one of the 4 propeller blades. Now the propeller was unbalanced with only 3 blades. So we had to stop at Hawaii for repairs. My reaction was, hooray! This is Honolulu with its famous landmark, Diamond Head. I enjoyed the surf at Waikiki Beach, but my attempt at surfboarding was unsuccessful. Some of the mahogany that we loaded in the Philippines was unloaded here in Honolulu. This was happening while the propeller blade was being reduced from 3 blades to 2 blades, so it would be in balance again to continue our trip. These are the hula dancers at Kodak Park, so named because it is a beautiful setting for photography. This is Aloha Schaefer, She knew me, so she danced specifically for this movie. She also sang Hawaiian songs for us, and she and her roommate were our guides for a drive around Oahu. This is the Punch Bowl, and affords one of the best views of Honolulu and the island. This is an Hawaiian tradition and a nice way to end the film of our trip around the world.